She shoved me off the chair at Dad's birthday and screamed, "Eat on the floor." She didn't know my phone was about to ruin her life. My sister screamed it loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. "Eat on the floor, Renata, like the dog you are." Then she shoved me, both hands, hard, right off the chair. I hit the tile at my father's 60th birthday dinner. 20 relatives watched. Nobody moved to help me up. My cousin Blake laughed so hard he choked on his wine. My Aunt Coral covered her mouth, but her eyes were smiling. My mother, Denise, just sipped her cocktail and watched me kneel on the floor like it was dinner theater. The tile was cold under my palms. Somewhere behind me, a waiter froze mid-step, holding a tray of champagne glasses, not sure whether to keep walking or pretend he'd seen nothing. This was the private room I had rented, the dinner I had paid for, down to the last centerpiece. The cake, 3 tiers, lemon and raspberry, my father's favorite. I had ordered and picked up myself that morning, balancing it on my knees in the passenger seat because I didn't trust the trunk not to shift it. And my sister Priscilla stood over me in her white dress, grinning like she'd won something. "You're so dramatic," she said. "Everyone's tired of your attitude." Nobody argued with her. Not one person at that table. My Uncle Rowan studied his napkin like it held the answer to something important. My cousin's wife pulled out her phone, probably to film it, probably to post it later with some caption about family drama. My father wasn't even in the room yet. He was still in the hallway with the restaurant manager, arguing about whether the cake could come out early, the way he'd argued about small, harmless things his whole life because they were easier to control than the big ones. He never saw any of it. That was the part that stung more than the tile under my hands. I stood up slowly. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I smiled. That smile scared her more than screaming ever could. Her grin twitched at the edges. "Enjoy the cake," I said. "It's the last thing of mine you'll ever touch." The laughter died fast. "What does that mean?" my mother asked, setting down her glass. I didn't answer her. The room had gone quiet in that particular way rooms do right before something breaks. Even the waiter with the champagne tray had stopped pretending not to watch. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My hand wasn't shaking. I noticed that, distantly, like it belonged to someone else. 2 years of swallowing my pride at that table, and my hand wasn't shaking. One tap. For 2 years, Priscilla had been draining our father's accounts, guilt-tripping him, isolating him from his old friends, one by one, until she was the only voice he heard all day. Throwing herself parties in his name while I quietly paid his rent, his insulin, his lawyer, his everything. She never once asked how I covered it. She just assumed the money grew back on its own, like grass, like it was owed to her simply for existing. She thought I did it because I was weak, because I'd always been the quiet one, the one who apologized first, the one who smoothed things over so Dad wouldn't have to hear us fight. But 5 weeks earlier, my father had grabbed my hand in his hospital bed, tubes taped to his arm, and whispered, "Don't let her take the business. Don't let her take what I built." His voice had been so thin, I'd had to lean in just to catch it, so I hadn't. 3 weeks ago, Priscilla told the whole family I was hoarding Dad's money out of jealousy. She said it at Sunday lunch, calm and sweet, right in front of him, while he sat there confused about what she even meant. She knew he was too foggy most days to check the numbers himself. She was counting on it. She didn't know I'd already had the paperwork filed for a week by then. The transfer had been done quietly, filed while Priscilla was busy posting vacation photos from a trip I never knew she could afford. Dad's shop, his accounts, his half of the building, all moved into a trust with me as the only trustee. Priscilla still had access to the checking account, only because I let her. Not anymore. My phone buzzed once. Access revoked. Priscilla's smile disappeared like it had never existed. "What did you just do?" I want to back up because none of this makes sense without knowing who I used to be at that table. I'm 34. I'm a forensic accountant. I spend my working life tracing money through spreadsheets, matching invoices to bank statements, finding the exact row where a number stops telling the truth. It is unglamorous, meticulous work, and I'm good at it in a way that has never once impressed my family. Priscilla is 36. She has always been the beautiful one, the funny one, the one who could walk into a room and rearrange the furniture just by talking. Growing up, I was the smart one, which in our house was a polite way of saying the one nobody worries about. Smart girls take care of themselves. Smart girls don't need attention. Smart girls sit quietly at the end of the table and pass the salt when asked. I'd been managing my father's books, informally, since I was 26. Roland Feld built a small appliance repair and resale business from a single rented garage into 3 storefronts across 2 counties. He never finished community college. He read people better than any spreadsheet, but numbers exhausted him. So somewhere around 2018, I started just helping out, which quietly became doing his quarterly taxes, then his payroll, then his supplier contracts. He always said the same thing when he handed me a shoebox of receipts. "You've got the head for this, Ren." I never did. I told myself that was enough. For years, it was. The early cracks started small enough that I explained them away. The way you do with people you love. 2 years ago, Priscilla moved back in with Dad after her second divorce, just until she got back on her feet. She'd always had a talent for landing on other people's feet instead. Within 4 months, she'd rearranged his living room, thrown out furniture he'd had since my mother left him for the second time, and started answering his phone for him, so he doesn't get scammed. Dad's getting older, you know. I told myself it was concern. I told myself sisters helped each other's parents. I told myself a lot of things because the alternative was admitting what I already half knew, that Priscilla had never once in her adult life done something for someone else without extracting more than she gave. The first real red flag came on a Tuesday in March, 14 months ago. I was reconciling Dad's business account against the tax software when I found a $2,400 transfer out to an account I didn't recognize. Memo line blank. I called him. "Dad, did you send money to an account ending in 4471? Priscilla set something up for for me, he said. Some kind of savings thing for emergencies. What bank? I don't remember, hun. She handled it. I told myself it was fine. Priscilla had always been financially reckless with her own money, never with anyone else's. I told myself that was a real distinction, a meaningful one. My stomach disagreed, but I didn't listen to my stomach yet. Not then. By June, the transfers had a pattern. Roughly $1,800 to $3,000 every 5 to 6 weeks. Always right after Dad's disability check and rental income cleared. Always to the same account. Always with his verbal authorization relayed secondhand through Priscilla. Never in writing, never something I could point to. I brought it up at dinner, just once, carefully, the way you test ice before you put your weight on it. Dad, I noticed some transfers on the business account. Do you know what those are for? Priscilla answered before he could open his mouth. God, Renata, are you seriously auditing Dad's bank account now? He's a grown man. I'm not auditing anything. You just what? Think he can't manage his own money without your permission? My father looked between us, and I watched him choose the path of least resistance, the way he always had. It's fine, Ren. Pris is helping me with some stuff. Don't worry about it. I let it go. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my job made me suspicious of every irregular line item, that not every unexplained transfer was theft. Forensic accountants develop an occupational hazard. We start seeing fraud in places where there's only sloppiness. I repeated that to myself in the car on the way home until I half believed it. I was wrong, and some small cold part of me had known it the entire time. The second loop started in September, when my father's longtime friend and former business partner, a man named Walt Okafor, who'd known him since before I was born, stopped coming around. Walt had been at every birthday, every holiday, every Sunday lunch for as long as I could remember. He and my father had opened the very first repair shop together in a rented garage in 1994. Then, without explanation, he just wasn't there anymore. I asked my father about it at Thanksgiving. He got vague and uncomfortable. The specific discomfort of a man repeating something he doesn't fully believe. Walt's been acting strange. Priscilla thinks he's been trying to get money out of me. Says he's been asking about my will. That didn't sound like Walt. Walt had a boat, a paid-off house, and a pension from 30 years at the shop. Walt didn't need my father's money, and in 40 years of friendship, he'd never once asked for a dime. I called Walt directly. I hadn't talked to him one-on-one in years, and he sounded relieved to hear from me in the specific way of a person who'd been waiting for someone to finally ask. Renata, I wondered if anyone would call. Walt, what happened? Dad said you two had a falling out. There was a long pause. Your sister told your dad I was pressuring him about money. Told him I was asking about the will, trying to get him to change his beneficiaries. I never said one word about his will in my life, Renata. Not once. I tried to tell him that, but she'd already gotten there first, and now he looks at me like I'm some kind of con man. I've known that man 42 years. My stomach dropped in a way I couldn't rationalize away this time. I thanked Walt, hung up, and sat in my parked car outside my apartment for 11 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I told myself I'd handle it slowly, carefully, that confronting Priscilla directly would just get twisted into me being controlling, jealous, dramatic, the same 3 words she'd been assigning me since we were children. I told myself patience was strategy, not cowardice. I still believe that was partly true, but part of it, if I'm honest, was fear. Fear of the fight. Fear of losing what was left of a family that already felt like it was dissolving one relationship at a time. The third loop hit in January, and it hit harder because this time it involved my father's health. He'd been managing type 2 diabetes for years, carefully, with an endocrinologist he'd seen for over a decade. In January, his pharmacy called me directly. I was still listed as a secondary contact from years back, to say his insulin prescription hadn't been picked up in 6 weeks, and his account showed an overdue balance that had triggered the call. 6 weeks. My father had never once, in the time I'd managed his health logistics, let his insulin lapse. He was disciplined about exactly one thing in his life, and it was that. I drove to his house that same afternoon. Priscilla answered the door in his robe. His robe, in his house, like she'd stopped distinguishing between what was hers and what was his, and told me he was napping and I shouldn't wake him. His insulin's 6 weeks overdue, Priscilla. His pharmacy called me. I've been handling it. You don't need to make this into something. Handling it how? He hasn't picked up his prescription. He switched pharmacies. God, Renata, you don't have to know every single thing. I didn't believe her, and I was right not to. I called the pharmacy back the next morning and confirmed. No transfer request had ever been filed. No new pharmacy had requested his records. There was no new pharmacy. There was just a man quietly running out of a medication that kept him alive, and a sister who'd told me a lie so casual she probably forgot she'd told it by dinner. I paid the overdue balance myself, picked up the prescription myself, and drove it to him myself, telling him some story about a billing mix-up so he wouldn't worry, so he wouldn't have to know his own daughter had let it lapse for 6 weeks while occupying his house in his bathrobe. That was the day something in me went cold and stayed that way. Not angry, not yet. Cold. The specific coldness of someone who has stopped hoping the other person will do the right thing on their own and has started instead keeping records. I opened a folder on my laptop that night. I named it Dad. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not my husband, not my closest friend, no one. I just started saving things. Bank statement PDFs, screenshots of texts, dates, times, the pharmacy's callback number, Walt's phone number, everything. A forensic accountant's instinct is to build the file before you need it, because by the time you need it, half the evidence has already been quietly deleted or explained away. The fourth loop was the hospital. 5 weeks before that birthday dinner, my father collapsed at the shop. One of his employees, a mechanic named Desmond, who'd worked for him 9 years, found him on the floor of the back office and called an ambulance instead of calling Priscilla first, which I have thought about often since, and which I believe may have saved his life in more ways than one. severe hyperglycemia, dangerously close to diabetic ketoacidosis. The ER doctor, a man named Dr. Amit Kessler, who'd been practicing emergency medicine for 16 years, told me flatly in the hallway that if he'd arrived even 2 hours later, they'd likely have been having a very different conversation. His blood sugar was over 500 when he came in, Dr. Kessler said. Has he been managing his insulin properly? I told him the truth. I didn't know anymore because I'd been shut out of that part of his life for months. My father spent 4 days in the hospital. Priscilla visited twice, both times for under 20 minutes, both times managing to steer the conversation toward how stressful the whole situation was for her. I sat by his bed for most of those 4 days because I could work remotely and she apparently could not be bothered, and it was there, on the third night, tubes taped to his arm, that he grabbed my hand. "Don't let her take the business," he said. His voice was so thin I had to lean in to catch it over the monitor's steady beeping. "Don't let her take what I built." "Dad, what are you talking about?" "She's been talking about selling the Fairview location. Says I can't run it anymore. Says it'd be easier for everyone." He squeezed my hand, weaker than I'd ever felt his grip. "It's not hers to sell, Ren. Promise me." I promised him. And for the first time in 2 years, I stopped telling myself the situation was ambiguous, that I might be overreacting, that patience was still the right strategy. It wasn't ambiguous anymore. My father, fully conscious, fully himself in that moment, had asked me directly to protect what he'd spent 30 years building. That wasn't me projecting suspicion onto sloppiness. That was a dying man's fear, spoken plainly, and I intended to honor it. The next morning, before he was even discharged, I called an elder law attorney. Her name was Marguerite Osei, and she'd practiced elder law and estate litigation for 22 years. I found her through Walt, of all people, who'd used her office for his own estate planning and vouched for her without hesitation. Her office was small, tucked above a dry cleaner, but she'd built a reputation across 3 counties for exactly this kind of case. Quiet financial predation dressed up as caregiving, the specific and depressingly common exploitation of aging parents by adult children who'd convinced themselves entitlement and love were the same thing. I brought the dad folder, all of it. The bank statement screenshots, the pharmacy callback logs, Walt's number, dates and amounts going back 14 months. Marguerite went through it methodically, glasses pushed down her nose, making small notes in the margins of a legal pad with a mechanical pencil. "This is a textbook pattern," she said, after nearly an hour. "Isolation from outside relationships, financial extraction disguised as assistance, medical neglect used as leverage or simply as a byproduct of control. I've seen this exact shape probably 24 times in my career. It rarely looks like what people expect elder financial abuse to look like. It looks like a devoted daughter. Is what she's doing illegal? Some of it potentially, yes. Undue influence, possibly financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult depending on how your state statute defines it. And if that $2,400 pattern of transfers can't be substantiated as authorized, we may be looking at conversion or outright theft. But civil remedies move faster than criminal ones, and faster is what your father needs right now. What we can do immediately is establish a revocable trust with your father as grantor while he's competent to execute it, naming you as sole trustee. That moves the business assets, the real property, and his primary accounts out of any ambiguity about who controls them going forward. Will Priscilla be able to contest it? She can attempt to. But your father is lucid. He's expressing a clear and consistent wish independent of any coercion from you. And we'll have Dr. Kessler's hospital records documenting his cognitive state at the time of execution. That's not nothing. Courts take capacity assessments seriously precisely because these cases so often turn on exactly that question. Was he competent when he signed, or was someone else's hand on the pen? We drafted the trust documents over the following 10 days. My father signed them in Marguerite's office on a Thursday afternoon, his hands steady, his voice clear, answering every one of her competency questions without hesitation. She had a paralegal witness the signing and notarize it on the spot, and she recorded a brief video statement of him confirming, in his own words, that this was his wish and no one had pressured him into it. Priscilla's going to lose her mind, I told Marguerite once the papers were filed. Probably, she said. People like her generally do. Once the thing they assumed was permanently available to them stops being available. My advice, don't tell her until it's already done. Don't give her the chance to accelerate whatever she's already doing, or to get to your father again before the transfer is finalized and recorded. I took that advice. I said nothing to anyone. I let Priscilla keep believing, for 3 more weeks, that nothing had changed, that she still had the run of accounts she no longer actually controlled in the ways that mattered. That was the week she stood up at Sunday lunch and told the entire family I was hoarding Dad's money out of jealousy, sweet and calm, right in front of him, while he sat there confused about what she even meant, because he was having one of his foggier days and didn't fully register what she was accusing me of. She was counting on that fog. She always had been. I sat there and said nothing and let her keep talking, because I already knew what she didn't. The trust closed on a Tuesday. I have the confirmation email timestamped 11:47 a.m. forwarded to me from the county recorder's office. Subject line, deed recorded. Instrument 2926-0341-887. That confirmation sat in my inbox for 6 days before my father's birthday dinner. 6 days of watching Priscilla move through his kitchen like a woman rearranging furniture in a house she believed she'd inherit outright. I hadn't planned to reveal anything at the dinner. I want to be honest about that, because it matters for what happened next. I had planned to let the transfer sit quietly for another month, let Marguerite finish the second phase, formally notifying the bank to close Priscilla's authorized user access on the checking account, which required a specific compliance procedure the bank's fraud department insisted on following to the letter, given the vulnerable adult flag Marguerite had also filed. I hadn't planned for Priscilla to shut shove me off a chair in front of 20 relatives and scream that I should eat off the floor like a dog, but she had. And something in me, something that had spent 2 years being patient, being strategic, being quiet, simply ran out of road. Back at the restaurant, the silence had a texture to it. 20 relatives, 1 waiter, a 3-tier lemon and raspberry cake sitting on a side table, and my sister standing over me demanding to know what I'd just done on my phone. "What did you just do?" she said again, louder, when I didn't answer. "I moved Dad's accounts into a trust," I said. "I'm the trustee. As of 11 days ago, you don't have authorization on any of it. The bank finalized the compliance hold this morning." My mother's face went through 3 distinct expressions in about 4 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like fear, though I couldn't tell yet whether it was fear for Priscilla or fear of what I might know about her own role in all of it. "You can't do that," Priscilla said. You can't just do that behind everyone's back." "I didn't do it behind anyone's back. Dad did it." In front of an attorney, on video, answering competency questions on the record. "I just filed the paperwork he asked me to file." He asked me himself, in the hospital, while you were spending 20 minutes with him twice in 4 days and telling everyone how stressful it was for you. That landed. I watched it land, watched Blake stop mid-laugh, watched Aunt Coral's hand drop from her mouth, watched Uncle Rowan finally look up from his napkin. "You don't know what you're talking about," Priscilla said, but her voice had lost its certainty. It had gone thin, the way voices do when the person speaking already suspects they're not going to win this. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know about the $2,400 transfers every 5 to 6 weeks for over a year. I know about Walt, who you told Dad was trying to manipulate his will, when Walt has never once mentioned the will in 42 years of friendship. I know his insulin sat unbilled for 6 weeks in January while you told me you were handling it. I know all of it, Priscilla, because I've been documenting all of it since March of last year." My father walked in at that exact moment, the manager trailing behind him, mid-sentence about the cake timing, and stopped dead when he saw me still standing by my overturned chair, and Priscilla white-faced across from me. "What's going on?" he said. Nobody answered him for a second. Then my mother, of all people, said quietly, "Priscilla pushed Renata on the floor." My father looked at me, really looked the way you look at someone when you're checking for injury, and then at Priscilla, and something in his face closed like a door. "Is that true?" Priscilla opened her mouth, closed it. The whole table was watching now, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, nobody was watching me with pity or dismissal. They were watching her. "She was being dramatic," Priscilla finally said, but even she seemed to hear how thin it sounded this time, stripped of the audience's automatic sympathy she'd always been able to count on. "She rented this dinner," my father said slowly. "She paid for it. She picked up my cake this morning." He turned to me. "Didn't you?" "Yes, Dad." He nodded once, like a man confirming something he'd suspected, but hadn't wanted to fully admit to himself. "And you moved the accounts, like we talked about. 11 days ago. It's done." "Good." He said it simply, without triumph, the word of a tired man setting down a weight he'd been carrying too long. Then, to Priscilla, "We're going to talk. Not here, not tonight, but we're going to talk." Priscilla's mask didn't just slip. It came off entirely in front of everyone, the way it never had before, because she'd never before been cornered with actual documentation instead of my word against hers. "This is unbelievable," she said, voice climbing. "She's turning everyone against me over some money that was going to be mine anyway. It's not stealing if it's going to be my inheritance regardless. It's stealing if I never gave you access to it and never agreed to any of it," my father said, quiet but absolutely clear. "It's stealing if you lied to Walt to get him out of my life. It's stealing if you let my insulin run out because you didn't want to deal with the pharmacy. That's not 6 weeks, Priscilla." His voice cracked slightly on the number. "I could have died in that hospital. The doctor told Renata that, not you." "Renata." The rest of the dinner didn't happen the way anyone had planned it. The cake stayed on its side table, untouched, 3 tiers of lemon and raspberry slowly warming under the restaurant's lights, while the family that had spent 2 years pretending not to notice anything finally had to sit with what they'd been ignoring. What followed over the next several weeks was not dramatic in the way people expect. There was no single explosive confrontation, no scene from a movie. It was slower, procedural, and in its own way more devastating than a single fight could have been. Marguerite formalized the bank's compliance hold into a permanent closure of Priscilla's authorized user status within the week. The fraud department at the bank, once presented with the documented pattern of transfers alongside my father's own written statement, opened an internal review that eventually referred the case, per their policy on vulnerable adult financial exploitation, to the county's Adult Protective Services Division. The APS caseworker assigned was a woman named Yolanda Prather, who'd worked adult protective cases for 11 years and had, in her own words during our first phone call, seen every flavor of this that exists. She interviewed my father twice, once with Marguerite present, and interviewed me once, going through the entire documentation folder line by line, cross-referencing dates against bank statements the bank had by then released under the abuse investigation. "This is well documented," she told me. "Better documented than most cases I see. A lot of families come to us with vague suspicions and no paper trail. You built an actual timeline." "It's what I do professionally," I said. "I just didn't expect to have to do it for my own family." You'd be surprised how often that happens. People who work in finance or law end up being the ones who catch this, precisely because they know what documentation looks like and they know to start keeping it early. The $2,400 transfers totaled just over $31,000 across 14 months, once Yolanda's office finished the full reconciliation with the bank's records. Whether that rose to criminal theft or stayed in civil territory as a repayable debt was a decision that ultimately sat with the county prosecutor's office, and Detective Marcus Villanueva, 20 years with the Financial Crimes Unit, was assigned to review the case file Yolanda's office forwarded. I met with Detective Villanueva once, in a beige conference room that smelled like old coffee. And he asked the kind of methodical, unhurried questions that told me he'd done this many times before and had learned not to rush any of it. The tricky part in these cases, he said, isn't proving the money moved. Bank records do that for us. The tricky part is proving intent and proving the elder didn't consent, especially when the elder has some cognitive impairment that makes their own testimony harder to rely on in court. Your father's hospital records help a lot here. So does the fact that you documented his direct verbal instructions to you contemporaneously, rather than reconstructing them after the fact. What happens now? We build the file. It goes to the DA's office. They'll decide whether to pursue theft charges and at what threshold. This state has different classifications depending on the dollar amount, and $31,000 crosses into felony territory. Could also be handled through a civil restitution agreement if your father would prefer that route, and the DA agrees it serves justice better than prosecution. That's often what happens in family cases. Prosecutors weigh the value of putting an elderly victim through a criminal trial against his own daughter. My father chose restitution over pressing for prosecution in the end, not because he'd forgiven her. He was very clear with me more than once that forgiveness wasn't the word for what he felt, but because, as he put it, watching your daughter go to trial doesn't give you back 6 years of erosion, and he didn't have 6 years left to spend on that particular kind of ruin. He wanted the money back, and he wanted her out of his house. He didn't need the state to also take her freedom to feel like the truth had finally been told. Priscilla signed a restitution agreement negotiated by her own attorney against Marguerite, agreeing to repay the documented $31,000 over 4 years, with the understanding, stated explicitly in the agreement, that any missed payment would revive the county's option to pursue criminal charges based on the existing case file. Walt came back into my father's life within a month, once the truth about what Priscilla had told him came out in full. Their first dinner together again, at Walt's house, Walt made a point of calling me afterward just to say thank you for tracking him down, for not letting the lie about him sit unchallenged. 42 years, Walt said, and it almost got erased over a lie she told to keep him from having anyone else to trust. You didn't have to call me that day. I want you to know I noticed that you did. My father's 61st birthday, 1 year later, was a smaller dinner. 12 people instead of 20. No private room rented at an expensive restaurant, just his backyard, string lights, a cake I baked myself this time because I'd decided I never wanted to buy another one from that bakery again. Priscilla wasn't there. She'd moved 2 hours away, into an apartment she paid for herself, and made her restitution payments on time, according to the quarterly reports Marguerite's office still tracked as part of the agreement's terms. My father had spoken to her twice on the phone in the past year, both calls short, both calls civil, neither of them warm. He told me once that he thought someday there might be room for something resembling a relationship again, once enough time had passed that trust could be rebuilt in inches rather than assumed in advance. He wasn't there yet, neither was I. Walt was at the backyard dinner, laughing at something with Desmond from the shop, the same laugh I remembered from childhood barbecues before any of this started. My mother came, quieter than she used to be, and at one point pulled me aside near the drink table. I should have said something that night at the restaurant, she said. When she pushed you, I should have gotten up. Why didn't you? She thought about it longer than I expected, because it was easier not to. It had always been easier not to, with the two of you. I let it be easy for too long, and I'm sorry for that. It wasn't the apology I'd spent years imagining I might someday get. It was smaller, more honest, and stranger for being so plain. I told her I appreciated her saying it, and I meant it, even though I understood it didn't erase 2 decades of exactly that same choice repeated at every dinner table before this one. My father found me later, sitting at the edge of the yard, while the string lights buzzed faintly overhead, and sat down next to me with the particular care of a man who still didn't entirely trust his own knees. You know, he said, I used to think you were the quiet one because you didn't have much to say. Took me 60 years and a hospital bed to figure out you were quiet because nobody in this family ever bothered to ask you the right questions. You're asking now. Better late than dead in a hospital bed with insulin I never got, he said. And it was such a dark, dry joke that I laughed before I could stop myself. And he laughed too. And for a moment, it didn't feel like the ending of anything. It felt like the actual beginning of something that should have started decades earlier. The business is still his, on paper and in every way that matters, with the trust simply standing guard around it now, the way a fence stands guard around a garden rather than replacing the garden itself. He still goes into the Fairview shop 3 mornings a week, slower than he used to. Insulin managed carefully now by a schedule I check on weekly, not because I don't trust him, but because I never want another 6-week gap to happen on my watch again. I think about that dinner sometimes. The tile floor, the cold under my palms, Priscilla's white dress, the smile I gave her that scared her more than any scream could have. People ask me, when I've told a shortened version of this story to friends, whether I regret handling it the way I did, quietly, for over a year, instead of confronting her the moment I found that first $2,400 transfer. I don't. Documentation takes patience, and patience is not the same thing as weakness, even though for most of my life those two things had been treated as identical in my family. It took 2 years of careful, methodical, unglamorous record-keeping to make sure that when the truth finally came out, nobody could talk their way around it. Not Priscilla, not my mother's convenient blindness, not the family's decades-long habit of choosing the easy silence over the hard truth. She thought I was weak because I was quiet. She never understood that quiet and weak had never once been the same thing, not for a single day of my life. She learned the difference the moment my phone buzzed twice at that dinner table, and the truth she'd spent 2 years building her comfort on top of simply, finally, gave way beneath her.